right. Well, thank you everyone and welcome to our second webinar of 2025. My name is Dr. Megan Martin and I'm an assistant professor at Mount St. Joseph University and the Higher Education Coordinator for MSJ's Center for Reading Science. Just a couple of things before we get started. So if you are in the position where you could turn your camera on, that would be wonderful. This will be an interactive session. I will email a link to the recording to all registered participants by the end of the week. And then the recording will also be available on our Center for Reading Science YouTube channel. I did want to share a couple of our upcoming events. We do have our March STARS webinar on the 24th, and I'll drop in the chat where you can register. And that will be with Linda Diamond, and she'll be reviewing the Evidence Advocacy Center and that work that's been put together. And then on April 28th, we have Dr. Susan Smart, and she will be reviewing her book, Next Steps in Literacy Instruction. All right, so without further ado, I will introduce our presenters today. So we have with us Dr. Julie Esparza Brown and Amanda Sanford. So Dr. Julie Esparza Brown brings a unique perspective to the field of special education through her deep understanding of how language, disability, race, and culture intersect in education. As a professor of special education at Portland State University, she draws on her rich background as a special education teacher, bilingual educator, and school psychologist to inform both her research and teaching. Her impact extends well beyond the university classroom. During her 4-year term on Oregon's largest school district board, she worked to implement the equitable practices she champions. Dr. Brown's research makes significant contributions to understanding multilingual learners' needs. As a principal investigator of Project LEA, an OSEP-funded model demonstration project, she investigated how to provide culturally responsive literacy interventions for multilingual students who either have or are at risk for disabilities. Her work provides practical solutions to one of education's most complex challenges, distinguishing between language acquisition needs and learning disabilities. And then we also have with us Dr. Amanda Sanford. She is a professor of special education in the College of Education at Portland State University. Her main research and instructional interests are improving literacy outcomes for multilingual learners and students with learning disabilities within the context of a multi-tiered system of support. Dr. Sanford consults with state leaders, districts, and schools on implementing research-based practices and data-driven decision-making. She specializes in work with elementary reading programs and teaches literacy methods and assessment courses at Portland State University for students earning their master's in special education. She is bilingual in Spanish and has a deep interest in culturally and linguistically responsive instruction with MTSS. All right, so I will turn it over. And then again, if you can turn your camera on, if you're able, that would be very appreciated. All right, thank you.
Thanks so much, Megan. And I will jump in. I'm going to put a little note in the chat, which I put up there earlier, but people have come in since, that we would like to know where you're from. If you have classes that you're teaching right now, we'd like to know what those are and what you're hoping to learn in this webinar. And so I'll give a little intro as you are getting some time to do that, and then we'll hop into the presentation. So our presentation is about the PLUS framework to enhance instruction for multilingual learners, and we will unpack what the PLUS framework is as we dive into the work. Great, I see Courtney. Thank you. You're teaching structured literacy courses. Excellent. This work is based on work that Julie and I did for Project Lay, a grant that we had from 2016 through 2021, and then a new grant, Dice Plus, that this is the project staff for. So we just want to give a nod to our colleagues who have done such wonderful work alongside us. We're really, really grateful to everybody working on this project, and know it takes a village to make exciting things happen. Great. Awesome. And I'm seeing Megan teaches fluency and comprehension courses. So I'll hand it off to Julie to talk about the session objectives and what we'll do, and passing it off.
Great, thank you. And I love Courtney's comment. So excited to learn this evening. So that really excites us to be here with you. So thank you for posting that. And tonight, what we're going to be doing is introducing you to the PLUS framework, which Dr. Sanford and I, along with one of our former students, created about a dozen years ago. And it is a framework to enhance existing instructional and intervention programs with linguistic and cultural support for multilingual learners. And we'll also demonstrate how to incorporate the features of PLUS into lesson plans through a video self-observation process. So glad to have you with us. Okay. So as you all know, sometimes we talk about English learners, and we'll kind of probably use both English learner and multilingual learners within our presentation. We're really working towards using multilingual learner as the term for this heterogeneous group of students, and multilingual learner to emphasize the asset of multiple languages, right? So multilingual learners, while we sometimes like talk about them as if they were just one group of a homogeneous group of students, it's not that way. They really are quite a diverse group of students. Some are born in the United States. Many of them are. Actually, 72% are born in the United States. Some are recent immigrants. Some have great English proficiency skills. And then there's a range of students that are developing their English at varying proficiency levels. Some immigrate here with a solid educational background from their home country, and some come with very little education if they've lived in a rural community with not a lot of access to education. Some come from refugee camps. And then we have the issue of what we call sequential and bilingual learners. And that is sequential, what it sounds like, students that have had the ability to learn both languages from birth. And I just had somebody talking about their grandchild yesterday, where they spoke with their dad in Spanish from birth and with their mom in English. And they're 3 years old and really very adept at using both languages in appropriate situations, versus a sequential bilingual, which are students that learn English after they've developed their first language. And that often happens at school entry, like at kindergarten entry or maybe preschool entry. The thing to know about the students that are born in the United States, they actually have the lowest academic outcomes as compared to many of the other subgroups of multilingual learners. So that's a real concern. And we have to ensure that everybody knows some principles of working with multilingual learners. Okay. Next slide. I like to use this little comic as a reminder of what our classrooms look like and the schemas of our students. So here's the teacher writing on the board stars and saying, today we are going to talk about stars. And as you can see, every student there had a different idea or their schema bubble of what stars is. So we have to start with ensuring that our language is really clear, that we connect concepts to terminology so that we're all on basically the same page. Okay. So we are sharing with you our latest kind of iteration of a multi-tiered system of support triangle. Ours has the typical three levels and three colors, but what you notice about it is that there are some vertical lines up and down throughout the tiers, and that is to show oral language proficiency levels. And in most cases, um, for our multilingual learners, really the instruction is still in English, but we are developing as a nation more dual language programs. So these oral language proficiency levels are in reference to the instructional language or languages. As you can see, this oral language proficiency level is important in core, where students get Title III services or English as a second language or ELD, supplemental instruction. It's called different across the states and within states. And that is an entitlement program. It's part of core curriculum, just like reading and math is. However, we like to remind folks that those same strategies and attention to students' language proficiency levels in the instructional language is important across the tiers of intervention as well. So we can't forget that they still need support in tiers 2 and 3 and into special education if they are a language learner or a multilingual learner. Okay. So that's the evidence-based instructional practices on the right-hand side here. And then we also have on the left-hand side, data-based decision-making with what we call a culturally and linguistically aligned lens. And what to know in Tier 1 is that we need to disaggregate screening data by subgroups, and in particular by the multilingual learner subgroup, to look to see how are they progressing as a group. Because what we often find in many systems is that when you look at the bottom 20-ish% of students that are needing more support, many of them are English learners. And so that begs the question of how effective is instruction in meeting the unique needs of culturally and linguistically diverse multilingual learners. Okay, so on the next slide, there is kind of a decision-making tree using our disaggregated data. And so by disaggregating our data, the data can be used both as a systems level analysis for the appropriateness of instruction for multilingual learners, and also to make individual decisions about students who might need more support. Okay, so at the systems level, we look at grade level screening data. We disaggregate by groups. And again, our target group is really the multi-level group. And we ask, how are their outcomes compared with grade level benchmarks? And if they are on target to meet grade level benchmarks as a group, great, continue the instruction, it is appropriate. However, if we see that as a group, they are lower than their grade level peers and needing to catch up to grade level benchmarks, then we need to look at core curriculum itself and make sure that, again, that we are providing the right linguistic scaffolds and supports and providing the background that they need in order to achieve. When we've gotten that into place, then there are times that we see individual students that are the outliers and still making progress lower than their true peer group. And we identify or define true peers as students that are very similar. So we don't want to compare a second-year-old or second grade English only student's progress to the progress of a second grade multilingual learner, who's only started learning English since they came to school in kindergarten. That wouldn't be an appropriate comparison. So we talk more about true peer comparisons in a link on the next slide that I will provide for you. But again, really this kind of disaggregating the data can help us identify both systems level issues or identify individual students that might need more support. This is really kind of unpacked for you in our current publication that is on the website of the National Center for Intensive Interventions. And so that graphic I just showed you and much more and a more thorough discussion of true peers can be found there. There's a QR code that will take you right to the brief itself. Feel free to download it, print it, and share it widely. Okay. So let's delve into this framework that we developed in 2012 and that we've written about since. So the PLUS framework is an evidence-based overlay for instruction and interventions. Again, it's appropriate for all tiers, and it aligns with the linguistic, cultural, and experiential resources of our multilingual learners. It's not a replacement for instruction or intervention. It's an enhancement, hence the acronym PLUS. It integrates effective evidence-based practices for multilingual learners into core instruction, supplemental interventions, and special education by merging skill and language development and meaning making using students' assets. It is unique in that it incorporates systematic and explicit instruction with evidence-based practices, and it can be applied across the tiers and in any instructional language, whether the instruction is in Spanish, is in English, because language and literacy are so tied that we always need to be really supporting language as we're teaching literacy. Okay. Here's a quote that really, I think, speaks to we use PLUS for interventions as well, as there are very few intervention programs on the market that have English learners as part of their research base. And it's so Kelly Wiseman said in a recent article, heritage practices of students from diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds are often even more marginalized within intervention context, suggesting that bringing a culturally sustaining lens to reading intervention may be both more vital and more difficult. And that's what our PLUS model is really for. So what is PLUS? So here's the acronym. So what we did in 2012, 2011, 2012 was we called the literature to look at what were the best practices, instructional practices in the instruction of multilingual learners. And we basically chunked them into this acronym. So P stands for pre-teaching critical vocabulary and language, priming background knowledge, and making cultural connections. L, language modeling, instruction, and opportunities for practice. U, using visuals and graphic organizers. S, systematic and explicit instruction, sometimes called S1, and S2, strategic use of native language, culture, and teaching for transfer. So those are the big ideas of what we need to be responding to make sure that we are addressing their unique needs of MLs. So here we have, and I meant to put a QR code, but you've got a link to the Project LE website that we can also type into the chat. You'll find ebooks that have lesson plans and more description of PLUS on our website. So next slide. And what you'll find in those ebooks is our lesson plan. So this is what we have developed in terms of really helping to provide these scaffolds for any lesson, whether it be a core lesson or whether it be an intervention program or even specially designed instruction. So we start with, of course, the content objective or the grade level standard, right? And then we always want to develop a language objective. So that's going to be the language that students are going to need to learn and to comprehend in order to attain that content goal. And though we've numbered the components, they really can be planned in any order. And I like to jump from the content and language objective to the systematic and explicit instruction. And that may be your intervention program. So say you're using rewards, that could be rewards lesson 25. And then we examine that lesson to see what are the words that we need to really pull out and pre-teach. And those are what we might call the big dogs, the important words that are going to be relevant across content areas that we want to spend some time teaching more deeply, right? And we can't teach every word that students may not understand, but we are going to also talk about some strategies for helping students flag when they come across unknown words in our lessons, because students need to understand 98% of words for good comprehension. And reading is about comprehension, not how fast we read. Okay, and then we also prime background knowledge. Do the students have the background to understand the content of the lesson? And the content in intervention programs and core instruction assumes a lot of middle class knowledge, middle American knowledge that our students may or may not have. So we want to think about, do we need to provide perhaps a quick video that will kind of give them a little bit of background knowledge so that it's really the hook into that reading lesson with them? And then the strategies, LUS, what do we plan in terms of ways that we can model language using sentence structures, sentence frames and sentence starters, perhaps using visuals and graphic organizers, or how can we teach cognates, perhaps, or words that are alike across multiple languages, or do a quick translation using our phones or iPads. Okay, and we'll delve more into these as we go along. We also have what the content ahead of you is from an article that was, I think it was available in the last fall, and it is from Perspectives on Language and Literacy that is produced by the International Dyslexia Association. We don't provide a link because I think it's behind a paywall, but there is a reference for you. So that's where a lot of this upcoming content is from. Okay. So we start with content objectives, and here we're going to be giving you some critical questions to consider for lesson and content objectives, as well as the plus components, and then providing you some examples of what that looks like. Okay, so the critical questions for content objectives is, what is it that students will need to know or be able to do as a result of the lesson? It may be a Common Core standard, or it may be just the lesson objective. And then we also want to think, so what language do students need to communicate their content knowledge? And what is the terminology or the language structures that they will need to use in order to communicate what they're learning as well? And understanding students' current level of language proficiency is important for interventionists as well as classroom teachers. And you can gather that information from your English language development specialist. And every state has an English language proficiency test that's generally scored on a rubric of like a 1 to 5, with 1 being a beginning learner, 5 or sometimes 6 on a rubric being those proficient students that we need to get all students to, and everywhere in between. Okay. Is this where you take it away, Amanda?
Happy to pick up here.
Sure.
Great.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to unpack PLUSS and to have some video example for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. So in terms of thinking about pre-teaching critical vocabulary, priming background knowledge, and making cultural connections, essentially this practice is about identifying and pre-teaching the vocabulary, and sometimes in interventions, there might be kind of odd vocabulary that students might not be familiar with, especially if you've got relative newcomers. Maybe they're in an intervention program where there's a phonetically regular word, but it might be a more complicated word like dim or dime, I think of. Students may need a quick definition of what dim means in order to understand the content. And especially when we're working with multilingual learners, sometimes tier one vocabulary or vocabulary that many English speaking, monolingual English speaking children are familiar with might be new for multilingual learners. So we are just mindful that we may need to give a quick definition, 5 seconds or less. We talk about this being a show and go, where you might have a quick picture on a phone or a short definition, so that kids can make that connection with meaning. And in intervention programs, the most common way we pre-teach critical vocabulary is maybe on the spot instruction, where we're just giving that fast definition or quick picture. We also want to make connections to prior learning experiences and culture, and teach word learning strategies to support understanding and word usage in context. So one of the ways that we try to make cultural connections is if we're going to show a quick picture, especially if there's something that is familiar to the student's culture, using visuals that are familiar to a student's culture are really powerful. Um, so some of the critical questions that we ask to do this are: which words are critical to understanding the text? Julie mentioned these might be big dogs that are vocabulary words that we can teach more deeply. And then which words can be taught with a simple synonym, visual, or fast mapping? Are there words that we need to be taught deeply? And oftentimes deep instruction in vocabulary is going to happen in core reading. And that quick show and go may be more appropriate for many of the intervention programs. And then the next piece is: what strategy will we teach students to identify unknown words and clarify meaning? And Julie mentioned a quick strategy. One of the things that we taught students to do in a repeated reading practice was to highlight words that they either didn't know how to read or didn't know the meaning. And then as the group read them in together, they just put a finger up in the air if they came to a word or a phrase that they didn't understand, and the teacher would um, quickly define it. And so just kind of creating the expectation that there's words that we're going to run into that we don't know. It's part of our classroom culture that we will quickly define it and then move on, helps every student in the group. In terms of examples for teaching vocabulary, we talked about fast mapping, providing a fast map visual or for a vocabulary word needing to be quickly defined. We teach students to identify the unknown words. We teach word learning strategies. And then in core instruction, most commonly, we do deep vocabulary instruction, where we ask students to pronounce the word, provide a student-friendly definition, teach the parts of speech, use examples and non-examples, and check for understanding. And if you've done and been a part of Anita Archer's wonderful work around explicit instruction, you've probably seen this modeled beautifully there. And we give another example with this Freyer model, where we're giving lots of different ways to engage with the word, teaching a definition, characteristics, examples, and non-examples. So that's when we're talking about that rich instruction with those big dog vocabulary words. As far as priming background knowledge goes, we want to think about, as far as critical questions, what background knowledge is needed to understand and learn the content and language objectives. Can students' existing knowledge be extended by identifying larger themes that correlate with their experience? And it's also important to think about whose knowledge is being privileged in the classroom, and make sure we are making deliberate efforts to bring in the full scale of knowledge for our students and range of knowledge and experiences. So, as far as examples go, we want to review prior taught information and make connections to prior relevant learning. We may pre-read an informational text that provides information about a topic being discussed. We could show a brief video providing background knowledge relevant to the text, or use video and informational text and experiential learning to expand background knowledge and expand the curriculum. And this is a powerful place where we might be able to make those cultural connections for students. When we think about making cultural connections, we want to think about, are there concepts that have different or same meaning across students' cultures? And we can teach, just like we teach cognates, we can teach students to bridge those concepts and think about how we can engage students and families to learn about their backgrounds and experiences. Some examples include read alouds from culturally relevant texts that includes the concept taught either as part of a lesson or at another time of day and make connections from the lesson to the text. Creating culture maps to get to know your students and use the cultural maps as living documents where students add to it to make connections from lessons learned over time. One of the favorite ways that I've seen students or teachers do this, and one of our former teacher candidates came back and did a beautiful presentation. He said, I was teaching reading mastery. I wanted to make sure to keep fidelity to the program, and I used the last 5 minutes if the students finished on time to read a text that was relevant to their culture or interest. And so this was a nice way to give a little reading reward at the end of class that students could work towards, but also make that connection and help remind us that all of the sounding out that we're doing, segmenting words to put them together, is really for the purpose so that we can read text that's interesting for us. And so that was a nice way to make that bridge. Julie, is there more that you'd like to add about the cultural maps?
Just a little bit in terms of, culturally relevant books are relevant when you know who your students are. So these cultural maps really help you to understand the students' contexts and backgrounds so that then you can choose culturally relevant books in which they see themselves.
Thank you so much. So then we get to language modeling and opportunities for practice. So we define this as providing language instruction in phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics at both the word and sentence level to understand content. The teacher models appropriate use of academic language, then provide structured opportunities for students to practice using the language in meaningful contexts. And some of the critical questions that we ask are how can I model and support students' responses to facilitate and use academic language? What structured opportunities to practice using language in meaningful contexts do I provide? And how do I develop all five of the language systems at the word and sentence level? I'm really being mindful that we need to teach all of these components explicitly. So some examples that we've worked with, you can have something like sentence frames that are either just written on a board, a Post-it note, a sentence strip, or we worked with one of our partner districts and they had these entire flip charts that they've now kind of uploaded onto iPads, but they had a flip chart on every table that provided these different ways to say things. If their students are comparing and contrasting, it would be blank is like blank because they both blank. Both blank and blank are or have blank. And so it gives students the language that they need so they can fill in the content. And this really helped. Students started becoming automatic with this so they could kind of do it without even looking at the sentence frames. But this really helped set students up for that academically rigorous language so that they could answer in a complete sentence using academically appropriate language. So some examples of this, we want to make brief and regular connections to language systems, making sure students have opportunities to pronounce words, especially words that are new for them. Talk about the function of the words, parts of speech, and how morphemes impact word meaning. So if we add an S, that means that there's more than one of something. So really teaching students how those morphemes impact the meaning of the word. And oftentimes we find with multilingual learners, they may leave off endings. And so really creating a high level of consciousness about what endings mean can help them to be more mindful about both saying the ending and understanding the meaning of it. We use language frames to model and support students' expressive language and practice in listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And the more domains that we practice in, the better students get with their language. And we gradually release responsibility over time. Julie, did you have something to add there?
Just that writing is always, the most difficult domain in which for children to progress in. So don't leave that out. I mean, that is an important, crucial part of literacy. So we want to make sure that we're focusing, and those that say modeling, like using those sentence frames, can certainly be used in writing as well.
Absolutely. And the power of first speaking with a peer and then being able to write it can provide that scaffold. And so that gets to that last step of chunking the steps of a complex process and using a corresponding template for students to complete to reduce cognitive and linguistic loads. One of the things we need to recognize is multilingual learners have that dual cognitive load that is learning new content in a new language. And so we may need to give some additional scaffolds, recognizing that they have a double cognitive load as they're learning. One of the ways we can reduce that cognitive load is to use visuals and graphic organizers. So this includes using pictures, graphic organizers, gestures, real objects, and other visual prompts to make critical language concepts and strategies more comprehensible to learners. Some questions that we can ask to do this are, do the visuals capture the target concept adequately? Do the visuals represent diversity of cultures when possible? Do I use visuals as a model for a completed product? Is there a graphic organizer to illustrate concepts or relationships being taught? And do I plan to explicitly teach and consistently use a limited set of graphic organizers? Julie, did you have something you wanted to add here?
Well, only in that the research shows that it is most effective when we choose, a limited set, a couple of graphic organizers that we might use consistently across a year, rather than thinking that we need to, be really creative and find a different graphic organizer once a week, because children really will benefit from the structure of a limited set. Okay.
Absolutely. Judicious review of those concepts and kind of creating cognitive maps for students is a very powerful strategy. So some examples of using visuals and graphic organizers, we might use pictures, realia, or gestures for vocabulary words.
And if I could interject, realia means real things.
Perfect. Thank you, Julie. Posting content and language objectives, posting the sentence frames, posting vocabulary words for students to reference so they're highly visual in the classroom, and showing the definition and visuals in a slideshow. We have an example here where we had a visual and have the word and the definition here. Here's an example of a Venn diagram that gets at kind of comparing and contrasting solids and liquids. And then we have this concept map where we think about pan and the different ways that that can be used, whether it's pancake, frying pan, saucepan, bread pan, etc. Then we get to systematic and explicit instruction. And as a literacy focused group, I anticipate that this is probably an area of expertise for many of you here. So we define systematic instruction as involving teaching in sequential manageable steps that progress from simple to more complex concepts and skills over time, teaching pre-skills before introducing more advanced concepts, and fading support as skills are developed and generalized. So really being thoughtful about the design and delivery of curriculum. And we hope that many of the intervention programs that reading interventionists are using have this systematic instruction incorporated into it, because it really takes a thoughtful process to develop systematic instruction. Then we have the other aspect, explicit instruction, where we're thinking about that day-to-day teaching, where we're overtly teaching each step through teacher modeling and examples, including following the steps, explaining, modeling, providing guided practice with monitoring and feedback, and opportunities for independent practice in concepts and content. That's that I do, we do, you do that Anita Archer has coined, and I think is such a friendly way. I do that with my kids. They know, or are we in the I do stage or the we do stage or the you do stage? And I've got a teenager and a tweenager. And so I'm saying a lot, we're getting to the you do stage of this, where you have to learn to make the eggs and cook the breakfast on your own. And I'm going to be there as a support. So some critical questions around that modeling. Do I explicitly state the purpose of the strategy and the techniques? Do I use direct, discrete steps in my modeling? And do I read the room, that's that monitoring piece, to measure students' understanding and encourage questions? As far as guided practice goes, can students anticipate the next step in the routine? Is a gradual release of responsibility present? For independent practice, are practice opportunities frequent and distributed? Are resources paired to student-specific language needs? And as far as corrective feedback goes, is my feedback supportive and targeted? Do I use questioning to facilitate the acquisition of the concept I'm teaching? And really thinking a lot about language modeling, reinforcing what students say, and then helping them kind of extend it in terms of language is powerful here. So, an example of systematic instruction, we have kind of some different programs that give nice examples. Anita Archer's book here, Haggerty Phonemic Awareness program that exists in both English and Spanish, where we have the I do step. The teacher might model a think aloud on how to compare and contrast characters in the story, for example. The we do is then that the teacher may ask questions of students and provide sentence frames to help them compare and contrast. And the you do stage is that teacher asks students to compare and contrast in partners and then in writing using a graphic organizer. And we may need to think about, have I identified the pre-skills that need to be taught before introducing a new concept? Have I sequenced instruction in manageable steps? And have we worked as a team to evaluate our curriculum to determine whether it systematically introduces, teaches, and fades concepts over time? Finally, we have S2, strategic use of home language, culture, and teaching for transfer. The definition here is identifying concepts and content students already know in their native language and culture to explicitly explain, define, and bridge to new language concepts in English, and using translanguaging strategies. So some critical questions are, how can I support students' continued development of their home language? And part of this is really teaching those bridges and connections between languages, helping students to understand what they know in one language can be bridged to the other language, whether it's sounds that are similar across languages. And it's also understanding when there are sounds that are different, like vowel sounds. Many of them are different across languages, and we may need to teach that as well. We talk about positive, neutral, and negative transfer, and that students need to be taught all of those things. Do I review the home language survey to determine proficiency and use of languages? And do I plan to teach students to transfer skills and concepts across languages and cultures? Which sounds and orthography patterns are likely to transfer? Can I link words to cognates in students' native language to support pronunciation and meaning? And are students allowed to use their linguistic assets and resources by translanguaging? Julie, would you like to comment more?
Well, translanguaging, I don't know if how many of you are familiar with the term, but it's been around for a while, and it really is when students can mix their languages because they're pulling from what they know from two languages, or maybe they know three languages. So it might sound something like, "Oh, I'm going to the tienda. I'm going to the store," and we used to say that those were language disorders, but what we really know now are that children are using the vocabulary in the languages that they have and putting them together for communication. And we want to allow that. We want to have that happen. Um, and if that they can talk to peers in a classroom. I know that there were some places in the past that used to say, teachers nor students could use any language other than English, and that was not a best practice.
Yeah, thanks so much, Julie. So an example that we have of strategic use of home language is creating dual language glossaries where we have the visual and we might give the word in Spanish, the definition in Spanish, and then give the word in English and the English definition. And so we've been working on master's projects where students have planned some of these lessons, and it's really made an impact for the kids when there's words that they might not be familiar with, and they can quickly look and have a visual and a quick translation into their home language. So the next thing we'd like to talk about is how we've applied this. We actually developed this process with our school partners, but have used it in our own teaching and during our summer practicum. And this is a video self-reflection process where students are asked to plan using the PLUS framework, record themselves teaching, and then we have a self-observation form. You can click on this QR code or scan the QR code if you're interested in seeing the video self-reflection process. And they note what they see and then analyze and reflect and start the process again. So we're going to walk you through what the form looks like. It essentially highlights the plus features. It gives a variety of different examples of what it might look like. And what candidates are expected to do is watch themselves over a video and highlight the things that they noticed themselves doing, note how multilingual learners were supported with the strategy, and they could do this as an observation process. We've brought new teacher candidates in to observe seasoned expert teachers to note the ways that they're doing this. And we've also asked them to reflect on their own teaching. The goal here is that it's a learning tool, not an evaluative tool, and that candidates get an opportunity to see this. We also recognize the PLUS framework is really meant to be flexible. So we very clearly say you're not going to see every feature in every lesson. That wouldn't be appropriate. We want to make sure to preserve the fidelity of an intervention program, preserve the fidelity of instruction, while we're making the just right tweaks to instruction to make sure that the content is accessible for the learners.
So another way of putting it, we talk about fidelity with a lowercase f.
Yep. Absolutely. So we are going to watch a video now. And if you were able to pull up this video self-reflection process, you can actually pull this sheet up with the QR code. What we'd like you to do is watch the video. You're going to watch for the different plus features. It's going to be a video in 5th grade where students learned about and practiced comparing and contrasting. They've also learned the content in Spanish and have a graphic organizer that they've seen in both languages. And you'll see an oral language task and a comprehension task where they're asked to then go and do a written reflection in the story El Vaquero, where they do a written compare and contrast. And you should note in the video, although it may be hard to see, that the objective is posted on the board. I can compare and contrast characters in a story. Some of the look fors, you can watch for co-teaching roles, priming background knowledge, how prior knowledge is reviewed and who participates, language supports, watching for the teacher modeling and students practicing, watching for visuals, the dual language supports posted in the classroom, the objective on the poster, compare and contrast sentence frames, multiple opportunities to practice, and monitoring with feedback.
Amanda, can you go back to the QR code? We were asked in the chat so they can get that.
Absolutely. And I wonder if I can actually grab this and plunk it in the chat. So I'm going to see if I can do that. And there we go. I think I posted it in the chat as well. So if you find that you get off the page or need to come back to it, you can come right back to it. Thank you. Thanks for alerting me to that. All right. So we're going to watch the video.
Students with ADHD save 10 hours studying.
Add first.
I know.
No, by all.
Here we go.
And there might be ads midway through too. So
we are going to start a new text today, but we have the same focus, comparing and contrasting. So read it after me. I can compare and contrast the characters in the text. Yeah, today we're going to read a short text and we're going to compare two characters along with answering some text questions with evidence. Okay.
Good. And I'm just going to make a quick note. You've got the English language development teacher here who's teaching. She's going to be teaching alongside the classroom teacher. So this is a powerful model of co-teaching. What I would love for people to do is, as you notice a plus strategy, if you would type it in the chat, type what you note. So already we're seeing that the teacher has modeled language and provided an opportunity for students to practice using that echo and kind of choral response. And you notice it's not one child that's participating, it's the whole class that's being asked to participate to promote that active engagement.
To review, compare and contrast, you guys fill in the highlighted words. Are we ready?
Yes.
I'm looking at you repeating. I see a lot of you repeating. Okay. When you
Compare,
analyze and discuss the between at least two people, places, events, or things. Okay, that's compare. When you analyze and discuss the between at least two people, places, events, or things.
And friends, we talked yesterday about some great comparing words. It looks like you made a list. I want you to check over here. Let's read through our list that you guys came up with yesterday of comparing words.
All right. So some phrases we could use are both are blank.
Both are blank.
Okay. Next one. You could say are similar because.
Are similar because.
Thank
Likewise.
you, Megan.
Let's talk about how they're similar. Likewise, the second thing or person or place is similar.
Good. And I love one of the things I saw pop in the chat is sentence frames. So thank you for typing in the chat what you're seeing.
Blank and blank, both blank.
Blank.
Is like blank because.
Blank is like blank.
You could also say, finally, you could say blank and blanks are alike because.
Blank and blank are.
Compare things, people, places, things that are similar.
Awesome. And then it looks like right next to that, we have our list of contrasting words that we started 2 days ago. And so I'm going to have you read them after me. These are some words that we can use in between our two ideas, people that we're comparing. So we're going to say, however, on the other hand, are different because, but is different than. Yeah, nice. Today we're going to add at least one new word, and we're going to add it to our chart in just a second. The word we're going to use to contrast or say how they are different is whereas. What's the word? An iguana has legs. A snake does not. It tells how they are different. Okay, so we're going to add whereas to our list. And then we're also going to practice comparing. So we're putting these two different functions, two different things that we're doing together today. So we're going to look at a picture in just a sec, two pictures, and we're going to compare and contrast. So we're going to try using alike. What's the word? And I actually see it already in your list of comparing words. We're going to say an iguana and a snake are alike because they both are reptiles. And because we're going to compare and then contrast, we added this word here. What word is this, friends? Yeah, because in our first sentence, you're going to tell someone a comparison. And then in the second sentence, you're going to tell them a contrasting observation. So we're going to use however in order to transition between those two ideas. Then you're going to give your contrast with whereas. Exactly. I'm going to give an example of what this will look like. And then Mr. Brandt, you want to give an example as well? Okay. So we're going to say, you can remember, you can say picture 1, picture 2. You could also just describe what you see. I'm going to describe what I see. So I'm going to say the mansion and the tent are alike because they both have windows. However, the mansion can fit many people and has many rooms, whereas the tent can fit less people and only has one room. All right, Mr. Brandt.
All right. The mansion and the tent are alike because in both places you can spend the night. However, the mansion has a hard, solid roof on it, whereas the tent has a soft roof on it.
All right, my friends. When you have your 1 compare and 1 contrast, I want you to hold up a 2. This is your think time. We are going to share with pencils in the middle. That means as you share at your table, you'll put your pencil in the middle to tell us that you've been able to share a comparison and a contrasting sentence, okay? Any questions about what you're going to do with your table mates? We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. If anyone's missing, just move to the next number. And at the end, we'll call 1 person from each table. We'll pick a number and you're going to stand up and share out. All right, number 1. So you're going to start. Ready, set, go.
The tent is
And
the mansion are alike because you can stay in them. However, the tent in the mansion or the tent. Wait, the tent, whereas
no, you say what's special and unique about the tent? The tent Pencils in the middle. You leave it there. All right. All right, friends. I can tell most of our friends have shared. Show packs if you're done. Mr. Grant, what number are we going to hear from today? If you are number 2, quietly and quickly stand up. We're gonna start with Logan.
So the mansion and the tent are alike because they both have roofs over their heads. However, the mansion is in a boring old forest, whereas the tent is in a luscious, beautiful place where you can actually get hit by waves.
Yeah, it's you notice the difference in their location, right? The tent's on the beach, looks beautiful, whereas our mansion's in the forest.
I love it. All right. So I want to go back to our presentation, and I really appreciate everybody putting in the chat the different things that you noted, the pre-teaching vocabulary, the language modeling, the guided practice. One of my favorite parts of this is the teacher dropping in and giving some coaching to the student who needs a little support, so he actually gets a correct practice opportunity, and really rich opportunity to review kind of doing both the content and the language piece of this. And their next step is to take this into the story and compare and contrast 2 characters from the story that they're reading. So as we come to a close, I want to make you aware of a few different kind of resources that you can look to. Our website, projectlay.org, has tools and resources and videos. This instructional video is posted there, and a variety of other instructional videos are also posted that try to highlight different features of the PLUS framework. And so we'd really encourage you, if you're interested in the video self-reflection process, you've got tools. There's a PowerPoint that explains step 1 and step 2 of the process, and the lesson observation forms, and videos where students can practice. We use these all the time in our classes and have our teacher candidates practice them. And we also use them in professional development when we're working with practicing teachers. And I really feel like there's nothing better than actually getting into a classroom and seeing it done with real children. That's been one of my favorite parts of our project, is getting in and doing video lessons and really seeing it in action. So I hope it's a valuable resource for you as well.
And those Plus ebooks are also available under, I think, the resources on Project Lay.
Yep. Yeah. Diceplus.org is our current website, and you can also access those resources under educator resources here. So we'd like to give a moment to have questions if you have them. And I'm not sure if any questions popped up in the chat throughout our time here. Oh, the link to the video, perfect. I think you've got that now.
Any thoughts, questions?
I had one question sent to me, and then I also had a question if you had any recommendations about where to find like great culturally inclusive books, because you talked about that as part of the practice. So I didn't know if you had, I know there's like Maya's Book Nook. I didn't know if there were other.
I think
Like-
Low and Lee books, are they still around? They have beautiful books, or Lee and Low. I'm looking them up.
I'm going to see if I can go back to the page that was referenced on.
It was with the cultural maps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
Low
I have a
and
quick
Lee
question,
Low
just
books.
whenever.
Yep,
So,
go
yeah.
ahead and hop in as Julie's looking for it. Maybe Julie, could you type it in the chat once you've got it?
Me too.
Perfect. Great. Thanks, Courtney. What's your question?
Yeah, first I just have to say thank you all. This framework, even though it's been around for a while, just to affirm you, is still incredibly relevant, and it's covering so many bases. I'm just blown away. I've kind of caught wind of it and seen it before, but just having you all explain it, I'm so impressed, and there's so much here that we can implement in our own teaching. So thank you for that. My question is around structured literacy, particularly at the elementary level, although really applying to any grade level. There's a lot of emphasis from experts like Stephanie Staller these days that's really reinforcing the idea of continuity of curriculum and activities from the tier 1 to the tiers 2 and 3 settings. And I think there's some confusion sometimes when it comes to what should be done, particularly during that intervention block of time for our MLs, regarding should they be having that extra double dip of structured literacy practice, as kind of repeating, getting more intensive practice of what they're learning in the Gen Ed Tier 1 classroom, or should they utilize that time for more functional literacy growth with like an ML specialist, and trying to fit together how those roles and all of those pieces of literacy and language fit together. Is this a conversation that you all have been having, or have you heard questions around this? I'm just so curious because, sometimes I get asked and I'm just not sure how to respond.
Absolutely. Julie, do you want to start with that?
Well, what I put in the chat, if you look, there's a Word document that I just created actually. So it's pretty new, of trying to make some connections between structured literacy and plus and what that would look like. So I would love you all of your lens on that, and give us some feedback on, does that help, address some of this? Because it's really about intervention programs using the same, these strategies are helping to bridge those language needs and experiential needs. So we are about, I guess, helping to fill skill gaps while at the same time, it's really the whole, oh, what's that reading model? Scarborough's rope, and the other model. Oh, what's the other model? Why am I blanking out?
Simple view, is that?
A simple view of reading, yes. So all of those models were really trying to address all of those components and not forgetting language. So I'm not sure if that's answering your question specifically. Amanda might have a better answer, but I do want you to please look at that document I put in chat and give us some feedback. And a more conversation would be awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much. Courtney, I think that's a great question. And I will say the most important part of that is asking the question and engaging in the conversation. A couple of things that come to mind. One is that I feel like the co-teaching model has been so powerful in our partner district, where we actually have at the team meetings the English language development specialist with the literacy specialist, with the gen ed teachers, having the conversation together. And then the ELD specialists are actually planning with general education teachers. And so that's one way to make sure that things are happening in the core classroom. A line that I love that one of our principals, Jordan Mills, uses is language is not learned in 30 minutes a day. So you can't do a pull-out ELD model, teach kids for 30 minutes, and then expect that that's going to permeate through the rest of their school day. It's very powerful when the teacher is involved in collaborating with the ELD specialist. Then we see the practices threading throughout other content and throughout the day. So I think that's one piece to create that continuity. The other thing that I would say is that sometimes a tier 2 intervention is really appropriate to go deeper or repeat or give more practice with what's happening in the core. And sometimes you really need an intervention program, and that really should be the nature of the conversation, and then talk about how we make those links. So do we need to share the special orthography that's used in the intervention program with the classroom teacher, so the classroom teacher can make a connection for the kids as they're coming back into the classroom? And that may be something that we can do. Can we use the alphabet that's reviewed in the first grade classroom and also make sure that we're using the same Alpha Friends or whatever it is when we get into the intervention? So can we make those connections for students? I think your question is the most important part about that, though, and how we bridge that for students.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Those are great thoughts.
Any other questions?
Please check out the website. There's also, with our cohort of that model demonstration grant, we wrote 5 briefs about multi-tiered systems of support for English learners. What does it look like in tiers 2 and 3 in special education, working with families, and then working with leadership? Those are all free and downloadable too. So check out the many resources we have there. And thanks for being with us today. It was really fun to see your smiling faces and to have you with us. And we were just humbled to be invited, so we're glad to have joined you.
Well, thank you so
We're
much, and
honored
thank you
to
for all
be
the
here.
work you're doing.
Eh,
This was great.
Thank you all. Thanks for your great questions.